The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and to not lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him, saying, "Grant me justice against my opponent." For a while, the king refused. But later he said to himself, "Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming." And the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, little insight for all of you into my childhood years. When I was a little girl, I spent, this is totally inappropriate, I spent my Saturday afternoons, after Saturday cartoons were on, I spent my Saturday afternoons watching WWF wrestling with my dad. That was how I spent my days. And at that point in life, I have to tell you, there were few things more exciting to a 4-year-old than watching Hulk Hogan and Jake the Snake battle it out in the ring in all of their testosterone-filled glory. Between throwing chairs and bouncing off the sides of the cords, jumping on one another, the excitement of a staged wrestling match was the most excitement that I could get in a week. So when I read our text from Genesis today, the one where Jacob wrestles with God, I will openly admit to you that the picture that I had in my head of this scene taking place is not far off from a WWF wrestling match. In fact, if we want to go that far, we could say that this was the original WWF here. Because in my head, I see all of this drama playing out. We have Jacob the conniver taking on the Lord. And in my head, I see the wrestling match of all wrestling matches, with Jacob the conniver holding the Lord in a headlock as he yells in his deep rustling voice, "I will not let go of you until you bless me." At which point, the Lord does so by giving Jacob a new name and a new identity of Israel, which means striven with God. And as the sun is rising, Jacob limps away, triumphantly holding his gold champion belt in the air and reflecting on the fact that he had just seen God, and by golly, he is still alive to tell about it. The fact that Jacob not only received a blessing and a new identity and lived to tell about it, that's a big deal at this point in time, is nothing short of astonishing. Because though we tend to remember Jacob as the nice guy from the Bible who gave his kid a colorful coat, it turns out that Jacob was kind of a conniving jerk. He was a conniving little jerk sometimes. He did a lot of really sneaky stuff, and he did a lot of really mean stuff prior to this encounter with God at Penuel. So to give you an idea of that, have our pew Bibles come in yet? Are they in your pews? No. Okay, well, I'm just going to give you a rundown of Jacob's story. And it all starts in Genesis chapter 25. So to give you a really, really brief overview. In Genesis 25, Jacob and Esau are born to Isaac. And right away, we kind of know it's a little bit of trouble because Jacob comes out, they're twin brothers, right? Esau comes out first. Jacob comes out clinging to the heel of his brother, right? So a little bit foreshadowing that there's going to be a throwdown at some point in their lives. And so because Esau was older, in that time, that meant that he was supposed to get all of the priorities of the family. He would get the birthright, and he would get all the rights to the land and all the stuff coming up. Well, somewhere along there, this is when they were kids, Jacob coaxes Esau into selling him his birthright. Okay, so the kid who came out hanging onto his brother's heel pulls a sneaky move, and he's like, "Sell me your birthright." And Esau goes, "No, I'm not going to do that." And Jacob says, "Sell me your birthright." And Esau says, "Okay." And so he took all of this inheritance right from the start. So we go forward a little bit, Genesis 27. At that point in life, they're a little bit older. Isaac, their dad, at this point favors Esau. He's also old and kind of losing his vision, and so he couldn't see very well. And so he tells Esau to go out, get him a goat, and when he comes back, Esau will receive a blessing from Isaac. Well, Rebekah's favorite son was Jacob, and so she's next door, she's hearing this. And so she says to Jacob, "You go get it, and then you sneak back in, and because he can't see you, he'll give you a blessing." And so that's what Jacob does. He cheats Esau out of a blessing from their father, which again is another really big deal. He's conniving, right? And so then moving forward in Genesis 28, Jacob has this weird dream. It involves a ladder. I encourage you to read it. It's actually a really kind of cool chapter, kind of weird chapter of Genesis. But what's important there is he has this dream. And in that dream, God makes a promise to Jacob. He makes a promise that he will get land and many, 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 many offspring. And then, spoiler alert, those offspring turn out to be the people, the nation of Israel. And so he makes that promise. God also promises that he'll be with Jacob wherever he goes, and that God will not leave until he has fulfilled that promise to Jacob. Jacob goes on and gets married. Of course, that's a really interesting story too. You might want to read that. And then in Genesis 30, Jacob goes on to do some more conniving and some more cheating of other people, and he goes ahead and he takes all the good sheep of his father-in-law's herd and he runs. Eventually they kind of make a truce, but nonetheless, he never seems to learn his lesson when it comes to this conniving. But here's the thing. Remember that spoiler alert I gave you a little bit earlier? Jacob's story goes on to be the story of Israel. And Israel's story goes on to be our story. Because even after 2,000 years have passed, there are still days, when it feels like we today are wrestling with God. And even after 2,000 years, somehow God has still managed to be faithful to us. Some days, having faith that God is the one who is in control of this world is really hard. And it truly does feel like a wrestling match. Between devastating hurricanes coming and taking islands and landscapes and human life, between horrifying scenes of those seeking refuge from war and watching at the same time America and our society become heavily divided over some upcoming election, we are left to question where God is in all of this. And even beyond that, there are days and moments in our lives that we are faced with really personal questions that hit much closer to home than the national or the world headlines. Questions like, what do I do about that broken relationship with a family member? Or where was God when I or my kid was being bullied at school? Or what do I do when I'm at work and my job pushes me to do things that go against my personal morals and values? Where's God when I'm sitting in the doctor's office or at home waiting for some test results? Some days, faith is a wrestling match. Faith is something we do, and it's hard. And as a person who stands in this pulpit and will be standing in this pulpit regularly, I can honestly look at you and tell you that faith is not an easy thing, because it's just not. Because we're human. Faith is not easy because we're human and we're broken. And as broken human beings who have to live with other broken human beings in this world, living in all of that is just hard. So faith is a day by day, hour by hour, at some points in our lives, a minute by minute thing. Sometimes having faith that God is here and actually loves us and will remain faithful and steadfast in that love is tough. We see that not just through Jacob's encounter with God at Peniel, but we see it through the struggle of the nation of Israel and beyond. But here's the thing. Despite the fact that it's a constant struggle, and despite the fact that it might not feel like God is present, the fact that we're wrestling at all is an indicator that God is indeed here and handing out blessings even when we don't deserve it. And Jacob's story is a story that reminds us of that. Because as a society and even as individuals, whether we intend for it to happen or not, we do tons of things to one another that make it hard to believe that we would be recipients of a blessing. We have a way of cheating other people out of grace because we said so. But that's not how grace works. We are just as good at cheating our neighbors as Jacob was. And we are just as arrogant and unworthy of that blessing as he was. But again, that is not how grace works. Because God does bless us. God blesses us anyway. And that's the amazing thing about God's grace and mercy and steadfast, faithful love. For even when it's hard for us to remain faithful to God and God's promises, God is still present with us, wrestling with us, and ready to hand out a blessing which happens regularly. True, we might walk away with some scars. In Jacob's case, he walked away with an issue with his hip, but those scars are all part of a transformation. Those scars are part of your transformation. Your transformation into something forgiven and someone holy. And that transformation happens through the grace and the power and the mercy of God. Amen.